Okay, friends, the only good thing that came about the Canucks losing in the postseason is now I'm starting up my Zoom chats once again because the last one I did was 6 weeks ago, and coincidentally, that's when the Canucks started playing. But hence, we were watching from the sidelines, but it allowed me to bring in someone who I've actually wanted to bring in from before the postseason. I'm thrilled to have him, and it's a wonderful way to start off these chats once again. Please welcome Harman Dayal. Harman, welcome, man.
Thanks for having me, Clay.
Okay, Harm, your reaction when someone calls you boy genius, and where did that come from, and who did that come from?
Yeah, so it obviously came from my late mentor, Jason Botchford. And I remember the first time I saw it was he was writing a post-game Athletics. And I had just written my first piece as a freelancer for The Athletic. I believe it was on Jake Virtanen and something to do about zone entries. And in that piece, Bosch referred to me as boy genius. And I think the first time I saw that, I was kind of in awe. It felt a little surreal just to see that from someone as esteemed as Bosch. And it was a tremendous honor. And I think from that point on, there's always been a part of me that's like, I don't consider myself to be a genius. So there's certainly a part of me that you wonder if you live up to the title, and there's definitely a little bit of pressure and expectation because of that. But just knowing the roots of it and how it dates back to Botch, it obviously means a lot because of that. And so I guess it's both an honor and in something that even though I don't consider myself a genius, something that a title that I hope I can live up to.
Yeah, that's funny. And now you're 20 years old, so pretty soon you're going to have to become young adult genius or man genius. But you'll take boy genius for now.
Yeah,
Awesome,
definitely.
And Harm, I was going to ask you a bit about Botch later on, but let's. It's a perfect segue now. Let's do it now. Obviously, he meant a lot to a lot of people in this market, and is very. We know all the things about how funny, entertaining, how passionate, and how encouraging it was to people no matter what walk of life. What's the one thing that you'll take from your interactions with him, aside from the mentoring and how much he did advocate for you as you started to get your foot in this business?
I think the biggest thing is just his selflessness and how he had time for everyone. It wasn't just people like me who were looking to break into the industry. It was anyone on Canucks Twitter. He had his DMs open for a reason. I mean, you'd even see at his live events after one of his radio shows or a live podcast at the end, everyone would want to talk to Botch, and he made time for everyone. He never mailed it in. And so that's one of those things where I try and, at least for myself, try and carry that forward, because it really is remarkable for someone who had such a substantial platform, and he had so many people who wanted to talk shop with him and just discuss hockey. And so just the fact that he had time for everyone, I think that's what made him so special too, was he was able to incorporate the community obviously into his post-game Athletics. And he sort of created that sense of community among Canucks Twitter. And I think that's the one thing that I'll take away about him the most, is just the selflessness and the time that he always had for others.
Well said. Yeah, no matter how popular, how busy he was, he always made time for people, which is awesome. And I will say, whether it's the Athletics like you and Thomas and Wyatt, or you doing your own analysis, your own articles for the Athletic, you're doing awesome, man. And I read everything that you do. I don't understand half of it, admittedly, but I do appreciate that everything that you are writing. Can you tell us maybe how you got? You don't have to tell us about your high school life, but tell us about basically from a writing for the Canucks, about the Canucks, I should say, how you got to where you are right now.
Yeah, so I think the biggest factor was just I always had opinions that I wanted to share. I think when I looked at some of the later Sedin years, looking at I think particularly after the 2013 loss to San Jose, because obviously I grew up as a fan initially. And so I had I was pretty steadfast in my belief that I thought the team needed to rebuild, among other beliefs and opinions I had. And I just kind of wanted a platform to be able to write and share my thoughts. And so I think it was around 2013 when I first started with, it's now Daily Hive. It was called Vancouver Buzz back then. And I know you, Clay, have roots tied back to them as well. And so I wrote for them for a few years, and then I think I translated some of that experience. I believe it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago now, maybe, that I started blogging at the Canuck Way, moved up to Canucks Army, and then started freelancing at The Athletic. And I think the biggest factor was just, again, I had a lot of these opinions, and I wanted to sort of express them. And along the way, I learned a lot about analytics and about evaluating players and teams, and trying to bring, I guess, sort of an objective layer to it, because I think a lot of times you see things on the ice, and it's maybe harder to explain to people if they don't watch the games. Like, for example, the perfect case study that I like to use all the time is Chris Tanev. I remember one of my first pieces was about how he was one of the league's most underrated defensive defensemen, and it's like, unless you watch him, how are you able to quantify that? And so that's why I started going into analytics, and I could say, we'll look at Tanev's defensive impact. And so that kind of just started to get the snowball rolling there. And that's kind of how I've gotten my start.
That's pretty, so you're telling you basically as a 13-year-old, as a grade 8 or grade 9, you're writing for, back then, Van City Buzz already.
Yes, but it wasn't very good. I can promise you that. I've looked back at some of the archives. There's some it's not very good writing. I can promise you that.
Well, I'll say this, you're too humble, because I know when I came in, 2016-17, and Rob Williams, obviously doing still good work with them right now, he basically told me to write more like you, and I think you were 15 at the time. So take that for what it's worth. Maybe that's why I'm doing vlogging now, not doing any writing. Oh, that's really cool though. So you're at the Athletic, and between that and your other exploits, is that a full-time thing for you?
Yes. Yeah. Wow. So The Athletic, what I've started this year has been full-time. Last year I was just freelancing, so I was doing school at the same time.
Yeah.
But over the summer, I knew that The Athletic had wanted to have at some point 2 beat writers. And so obviously they offered me the opportunity heading into this season. And so a dream career, and I was never going to pass that kind of opportunity up. You never know when the next time is that you'll have the opportunity to work in hockey. So right. Definitely privilege, something I never take for granted.
Right. Now, I dip into the comment section in the Athletic, and I know there's a lot of people who are already proposing you as a future Canucks GM. So I'm not going to put you on the spot that way, but what is maybe one or a couple career aspirations for you? It sounds like you do want to stay in hockey of some sort. And it's funny, I'm talking to you, but you're only 20 years old. So I know you got the whole world in front of you and you're a lot of time, but what would be a couple career aspirations for you, Harm?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about that over the past couple of years. I think for me, the biggest factor is just kind of maximizing my career working in hockey, because it's definitely not an easy industry to stay in, especially when you look at kind of the state of media, and you see newspapers, for example, how many full-time jobs are being cut as a whole. So I guess priority one is just whatever keeps me employed in hockey, whether that is as a journalist or whether that is perhaps on the team side. I think if I were to speak from a media perspective, I'd just love to continue branching out and looking at other platforms where I could continue to provide content. I think I look at radio as one sort of domain where I'd love to expand. And I look at what JD Burke, for example, has done, and how he started in a similar position to mine, and now he's got his own show, Rink Wide, on Saturdays that he absolutely kills it on. And you look at another opportunity is this year I had I did one Sportsnet TV appearance in the Intermission panel, and I was so nervous, and I probably wasn't good at it, but I'd love to in the long term do that on a more regular basis. So I think the writing's always going to be there. That's going to be front and center for me, the staple of what I do, but I'd love to be able to branch out and do radio and TV. And so I think that's what's on my mind right now. As far as beyond that, potentially working on the hockey side of things, I think me being 20 years old, I've still got so much to learn. And I think that's definitely one of those things where it's in the back of my mind, but right now I'm really happy at the Athletic, and I just love to continue to work my way up in the media sphere.
That's awesome. Tell me about that. I do remember watching that intermission appearance. What was that like overall? Because yes, you are exceptionally strong writer. You're very well spoken as well, whether it's radio or TV. But it's one thing to do a vlog or do one of these things, but it's another thing to be in front of 100,000 people on sports. And what was that like?
It was very nerve-wracking. I think I'd done a couple of, I think, global TV type appearances before, but it wasn't anything like that because when it came to the intermission panels, there's a sense of urgency that you have to quickly get your point across.
Yes.
It's like you have 30 seconds before you're going to break or you have to move on to the next topic. So I think it's just the quick pace and just having to think on your feet. And I think contrary to what a lot of people think, there's very little preparation that goes into it. Like it is pretty much done on the whim. You might discuss before a couple of topics that you might touch on in the panel, but otherwise you really are just playing it by the ear. And because of that, I think the biggest thing is you've just got to try and slow down as much as you can as far as your thoughts. But definitely it's all about efficiency in TV, high stress for sure. But I think when it came to the second period, I felt a little bit more comfortable. And I think just like anything, it's one of those skills that the more you do it, the better you get at it. So hopefully I in the future can get the opportunity to continue to work on that craft.
That's cool. Was it Murph and Ian McIntyre? I can't remember who it was exactly.
It was Murph, and I believe it was Scott Rintoul, actually.
Ah, okay. And you did first and second intermission.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's crazy. You're exactly right, Harm, because that's one of maybe 3 or 4 segments that are happening during that 17-minute intermission. So you only have 3 or 4 minutes to start with, and now you're sharing it with an interviewer and a co-panelist. So you're right. You may chat 2 or 3 times, and you need to be efficient, but you want to sound like you're able to articulate your point.
So yeah, exactly.
Well, that's why I'm on YouTube, no limits, and I just can blab, and people can just turn it off whenever they want, and it works out really well. I was going to ask you too, when you're writing something, let's say a deep dive on, and using a lot of statistical analysis, in all seriousness, I do appreciate it. I don't understand some of it, but I always get the gist of what you're saying. Do you ever think when you're writing, Harm, oh man, this may be too, and that's not to insult your reader's intelligence, but you're ever thinking, well, this might be too deep, or this is too in depth, or sometimes you're thinking maybe I need to go deeper because my readers expect it. Like, how's that balance for you when you're actually writing?
It's definitely there. I think the number one priority for me is definitely, as you mentioned, trying to make sure that I am able to present my findings in the most, I wouldn't call simplistic the right word, but just the most understandable way possible. Because I think the problem that a lot of other analytics writers run into is they use maybe a lot of jargon or they overcomplicate things. And so it can be hard to follow along for people that aren't enthusiasts when it comes to analytics or video deep dives. So it's always in the back of my mind is how can I articulate the point I'm trying to make in a simpler way so that everyone can understand it, regardless of if they are aware of these analytics backgrounds or these tactical backgrounds or systems that I'm talking about. And so I definitely frame everything with that in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing that I try and do is use simple terminology. And if there is ever an instance where I'm using a metric or a statistic, explain what it is. Because I know from my experience, when I was first reading a lot of these deeper dives from other writers, one of the biggest pet peeves was when a writer would talk about a metric, talk about a stat, but they wouldn't explain what it is or why it's relevant or why it's important. And I think that's where you can really lose some readers. And so the other factor that, in addition to that I've really tried to focus on is trying to be more concise with my pieces. I remember the first few, again, I'm still not very good at it, but one of the first few articles I would do as a freelancer, lot of those would be almost 4,000 words. And so I've tried to kind of trim that down so that I'm closer to the 2,000 to 2,500 word range for a deep dive. And I also try and include a conclusion, sort of like a conclusion section at the end, just where I can recap a lot of points. So people who maybe don't want to read the minutia can just skip to the bottom and read the main key takeaways. And I think that helps in terms of actual retention. So definitely there's a balancing act there, but at the same time, readers do expect you to go beyond the surface and help dig up insights that they otherwise might not be able to pick up.
Yeah, no, great point. And if I may say, I think you've really mastered that balance, because I think when you're, and I've even seen in the 2 years that you've been writing for The Athletic, I've seen that maturity as well, because if there's someone who really already gets analytics and those deep dives, they can skip like your paragraph on when you're explaining what it means, like what it actually, the definition is. And then they can go right to the analysis. How does this affect the Canucks? Why do they have to do this better, or how to improve it? So I really think that you've mastered that balance well. And I know for me, in all seriousness, when I'm being serious and genuine when I say a lot of those stats are still foreign to me. So you do a very good job for explaining those to a reader like me. So I want to thank you that way on behalf of anyone else like me, any other good-looking 46-year-old Asian guys that are reading your stuff. One other thing I was going to, when you do the deep dives in the videos, I can't remember, Harm, do you put sound in yours, or are yours GIFs, or are they actual video with sound in them?
I don't include sound for the most part, mostly because the way it works, because I remember I always wondered about this when I would see clips on like Twitter. I'd wonder how are people posting these clips? How are they gifting it? And so basically what you're doing is you're essentially just screen recording on your laptop the plays. And because of that, the sound part becomes a little bit tricky, because unless you're broadcasting it out loud, like you need a special plugin. So it's possible, but I figure for the most part, the audio or the commentary doesn't usually add a whole lot. So I don't record with audio.
Yeah, I just asked that because there'll be many times where I'm reading the Athletics or one of your articles, and that's why I asked about the sound, and it'll be like midnight or 1 a.m. when they get posted, right? Especially the Athletics.
Yeah.
And Gail's trying to sleep, and then suddenly she hears this big, thing come from my phone. So I do have to be a little more subtle, I think, or at least read it in the morning, or go to the bathroom or something. But that's for me to figure out, not for you to figure out. No, that's awesome, Harman. I love hearing about your journey, especially. And I remember it was last summer when we were playing softball. Well, I was playing softball and you were doing some crazy soccer,
I remember that,
up and down the hill. That place has changed a lot, by the way. I'm not sure if you still go there, but yeah.
I haven't seen it. What's changed there?
Well, they've completely made that like a paved like staircase, so it's more of a walking trail type thing. Yeah, so it's kind of cool. Anyways, no one else knows what we're talking about, but you and I know that.
Yes.
And that's the important thing. All right, let's talk about the Canucks. And especially, you're right, as before we press record, we're talking about how crazy this offseason is going to be. Now we're at 3.5 weeks until the draft and free agency. But I was really, really interested in that wonderful article that you and Drance did about trying to project the 2020-2021 roster. And what's really cool is you had like 9 or 10 different categories. It wasn't just they'll be back or they won't be back. You had stay, returning, restricted staying, 50-50, wildcards, on the block expansion, buyout, and moving on. So 9 different categories. I want to touch on a few of those guys if that's okay.
For sure.
Awesome. The one that's on top of everyone's mind, what do you think is going to happen with Jacob Markstrom and Thatcher Demko?
I think Vancouver's top priority right now is to retain Jacob Markstrom. For right or for wrong, let me explain, I think, what their thought process is. I think they look at Markstrom, they fully recognize that he was the team's most valuable player this year. And I think they see that he offers a level of certainty heading into next season, because when you look at how the Canucks achieved success this year, it was heavily reliant on goaltending, because the Canucks were really permissive defensively in terms of allowing high quality shots against. So even with average or decent goaltending, the Canucks would not have made the playoffs this year. And so when you consider that, I think the margin of safety that the Canucks have for next season, it's very small. Like they're going to need top 10 goaltending again next year. And for as promising and for as exciting as Demko is, and we all saw how well he played against Vegas, we still don't know if he can be a number 1 goalie or not. And I think if you're of the belief that you want to keep Demko, you want to let Markstrom go and roll with a Demko-led tandem, I think you have to be willing to accept the possibility that if Demko isn't ready, the team could take a step back. And I think from management's perspective, that's just something that they don't want to dabble in. They look at Markstrom and they see certainty, and I think that's why they're going to prioritize trying to re-sign him.
Great answer. And I know we're not in the room, but if you were the GM, like many Canucks fans want you to be in as short as 3 or 4 years, would you be trying to sign Markstrom for how many years and for how much? Ballpark.
Yeah, from my perspective, obviously goaltending is difficult. It's a lot more challenging to evaluate than skaters because it's a completely different position. And I think if I were in the GM shoes, the biggest concern for me is I'd be wary not to give out term. You look at all the free agent contracts that get signed typically on July 1st. What kills you isn't the cap hit; it's the term for players that are in their 30s. And you look at Markstrom. He's going to turn 31 in January. You've got to be wary. I really would be careful. I would be very, very cautious of going beyond 3 years. Like 4 or 5 years, that's where I start to get uncomfortable. I fully believe that Markstrom has earned more on the unrestricted market, but at the same time, I also believe that Vancouver is a favorable spot for him when you consider the trajectory of the team, the fact that Ian Clark is here and how he built up Markstrom's career. And so for me, I wouldn't want to go beyond 3 years. I'd be willing to budge a little bit on dollars. So I wouldn't. My offer would be 6 times 3. I don't know how feasible that is.
Right.
I'd even be willing to go 6.25 times 3. Because in that sort of scenario, you're at least limiting the long-term risk with Markstrom, because he's going to be an upper echelon starter for at least another 2-3 years. You just don't know about how things are going to trend after that, especially because he had that knee injury earlier in the year, tweaked his groin in the playoffs. So you've just got to be a little bit careful there.
Oh, well said. And of course, the shorter you go, you got to bump up that annual value just a tiny bit more. So that, yeah, 6.25 makes sense to me. A lot of people were talking about Markstrom, Toffoli, and Tanev as the big three when it comes to the UFA side, at least. You, in your article, you have Toffoli as a 50-50, and you actually have Tanev as a potentially moving on. Can you explain why?
Yeah, I think when you look at Chris Tanev's situation in particular, again, he's earned a significant pay raise just with the type of resume that he's put together as this defensively sound blue liner. You really don't see that skill set prevail that often in the NHL anymore, especially you look at the value of that in the playoffs, and Tanev had a good postseason. But I think from Vancouver's perspective, again, the risk there is age and injury history, because Tanev is going to turn 31, I believe, in November. He's logged a ton of heavy miles on his body, to say the least. You look before this year, he struggled to consistently play 60 games in a year, and I'm really worried about that. He's been an absolute warrior for the Canucks, but I look at someone like Ryan Kessler. His body broke down in his early 30s, and so while I don't doubt that Tanev would be really helpful for the Canucks in the near term, and they would really miss his skill set if he departed, the risk of signing him to a long-term extension is just too high. And so there's that. And the other facet is, I think when you look at how Tanev's game has matured over time, his puck moving ability, his skating has started to deteriorate over the last couple of years. I think when you look at the partnership that he has with Quinn Hughes, I think Hughes' emergence and the impact that he has in transition as a one-man breakout machine, it's almost kind of masked those deficiencies in Tanev's game. We talk so much about Tanev allows Hughes to roam free offensively, and I definitely agree with that to some extent. And I've said this before, I think Hughes benefits Tanev's game way more, because now Tanev doesn't have to transition the puck. And so I think that part of his game is maybe something where just watching him, you may not realize that it's deteriorating, but I don't think it's as effective. And I just don't think he's quite the same top pairing type of defenseman that he was earlier in his career. So for those reasons, I don't think that he's as high on the pecking order as Tyler Toffoli, who showed that he can play with Elias Pettersson, who showed that he's a fit on the top power play unit, who is an instant injection of offense for Vancouver's top six. So that's kind of the rationale of why we believe that Toffoli is higher on the pecking order than Tanev, though obviously it depends on if Toffoli wants to return to Vancouver or not.
He says that he does.
Hopefully, yeah.
Great answer. So, and then of course, other UFAs include Fantenberg, who I agree with you. I think he's gone. You just have some young players you want to play in that position. And yeah, Josh Levo, he unfortunately probably hurt his bargaining power with that injury. Obviously not his fault, but that's going to be an interesting one to watch as well. I want to jump to the RFAs, and I agree with you in that I think Gaudette, McEwen, and Mott are no-brainers because of their situations. So I do want to talk about the two that I think most people are interested in when it comes to the RFAs, and that's of course Jake Virtanen and Troy Stecher. You have Virtanen on the block and Stecher as part of the 50-50 club. Can you talk about both really quick, Harm, please? Actually, not even really quick. Can you talk about both?
Yeah, I think when you look at Virtanen's situation up and down the organization, there's just a frustration and maybe a belief that he may not be someone who's going to put it all together. And I think when you examine his profile and he had a really strong regular season, offensively at least, and with the type of production that he had, he's in line for roughly $3 million if he goes to a salary arbitration. So when you look at the type of cap hit that he could command, and you look at the salary cap situation that the Canucks are in and how precarious and how limited they are and how much space they have, the Canucks have to be efficient with every dollar that they spend. And I think they look at Virtanen and they say, if we're able to bring Toffoli back, can we afford to pay Jake Virtanen $3 million to play on our third line? And that to me is where things get dicey. And I think that's why they would be open to the idea of shopping him in a potential trade. Again, if Toffoli doesn't resign, I think it becomes more likely that they try and figure out a way to bring him back. But as it stands now, I think there is a legitimate possibility that he's not on the opening night roster for next season.
Yeah.
When you look at Troy Stecher, similar sort of thing as far as salary arbitration. I think they value and covet Stetcher's skill set on a third pair. I don't think they view him as anything more than a third pair defenseman, and that's where things really get tricky because Stecher, again, based off his arbitration case, could be in line for roughly $2.5 million. Per year. And when you consider that sort of financial commitment on your bottom pair, it might be a luxury that the Canucks can't afford. And because of that, I think you're in a situation with Stecher where if he's not willing to accept a hometown discount, the Canucks might be in a spot where they might quite simply run out of room. And because of the salary arbitration risk, you may not even see him qualified if the Canucks don't see him as part of their plans for next season.
And that's Ben Hutton part 2, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I want to jump back to the defenseman in a second, but no, actually, I'll do the defenseman first, then I'll ask you one other question. So between Olli Juolevi on the left, Brogan Rafferty on the right, and Jack Rathbone also on the left, do you see any of those three guys potentially being on the opening night roster in January 2021?
I could see Brogan Rafferty. I don't think necessarily that it's because he's slammed on the door and broken it down. But again, when you talk about the club's salary constraints, they're going to have to cut costs somewhere. They're going to have to cut corners. And I think when you look at a potential bottom pairing spot, you look at Brogan Rafferty, and I expect either one of him or Jack Rathbone to claim a spot on that third pair, just so the Canucks can be more efficient with their cap and save a little bit of money. I think when I look at Rafferty, the offensive ability, the puck moving acumen has always been there, but I just don't know about his ability to defend at the NHL level, particularly off the rush, because his pivots, his skating ability, it does leave something to be desired. Beyond that, Rathbone, again, it's just a matter of if he's ready. I'm really high on Rathbone. I think he has the ability, the potential to be a top four defenseman in the league one day. But he is raw. I think he would make an instant impact in transition. I think he is better equipped to something like defending the rush, but it's about his decision making, whether he can make plays at the pro level without while mitigating risks. So I think those two have the best chance. I think Olli Juolevi, he could crack the roster in sort of a 7th or 8th defenseman sort of role. I'm not sure if he's necessarily ready to be a regular. We'll see, because it has kind of been a tale of two seasons for him.
Yeah.
I think earlier in the year, he kind of struggled with his mobility. I didn't see a whole lot in his AHL action that suggested to me that he was ready, but then we saw him come back in training camp, and he looked a lot better than someone like Brogan Rafferty. Whereas in the AHL, Rafferty looked a lot better than Juolevi. So we'll see how that dynamic kind of carries forward into next year's training camp. But I think that I'd wager that at least one of those guys is on the NHL roster for next season.
Yeah, it's funny. At least for one more year, we seem a little more solid on the left side, obviously with Hughes and Edler for one more year, and then Ben could actually, if he's on the team, could still play that left side as he did for most of the season. And then on the right, who knows? You have Tyler Myers, and then who knows what Stetcher, who knows what Tanev.
Exactly.
So we'd love to know. We talk about moving money, trying to move players, move money. Do you anticipate any of that actually happening?
Well, they're going to have to if they want to if they want to re-sign the players that they do. I think with someone like Louis Eriksson, I think you're not going to move that contract realistically in a flat cap environment. But when you look at Brandon Sutter and the type of playoffs that he had, I think he rebuilt some of his value. And I think the positive, the silver lining in a lot of these contracts is that the actual money that's owed on these deals, the actual salary, it isn't as high as the cap hits.
Right.
And because of that, it's more palatable for teams to take on, right? Because if you take on Brandon Sutter's contract, yes, his cap hit is $4.375 million, but you're not paying the full freight of that in salary because the deals have been front loaded. And because of that, I think some of the contracts would be easier to move. I think the Canucks are going to have to get creative with it, but because of the unique situation that we're in, I think you're going to have a lot of teams that are looking to move out similarly inefficient money. And I think one of the examples that Tom and I were talking about recently was for an example, Buffalo, and you look at, they have Marcus Johansson, and I think he's making somewhere along the lines of $4 million. And Buffalo had, I think, the 30th ranked PK. They really struggled defensively. And Dran said, well, what if you moved one of Beagle or Sutter, retained a little bit of money, and made sort of a swap that sort of way. And so I think there are going to be some situations where that is possible. I think you can also look at potentially buying out Sutter if you can't trade him. Russell's a potential buyout opportunity. There are ways to try and navigate this. It's not going to be easy by any stretch of the imagination. I think Jordy Ben, with his $2 million, I think you should be able to move that fairly easily. It's going to require outside of the box thinking, but I think it is doable to at least get rid of some of these contracts and open up some flexibility.
Cool. And last question before we wrap up with our rapid fire at the end. He's the 6th highest vote getter in the GM of the year category. Do you think Jim Benning has the ability, not the ability, but do you think he'll be able to think outside the box and do some considerable good work this offseason? What's your gut feeling, Harm?
Well, I'm kind of torn here because on the one hand, when you look at Benning's resume, typically he's been a straightforward shooter in terms of his decision-making, and he hasn't necessarily done things like weaponizing cap space in some of the earlier rebuild years. And he's often looked for the quick fix in free agency to supplement some of his roster to just flesh out some of the depth. And so I don't think that we've seen a lot from him that suggests he can think that he has thought outside the box, but at the same time, over the last, I want to say 18 months, we've seen Jim Benning do things that he otherwise hasn't done before. Like his track record has genuinely improved. When you look at the JT Miller trade, you look at the Tanner Pearson trade, and there have been obviously blemishes along the way still. I mean, signing Tyler Myers is still a questionable decision. Signing Michael Furland hasn't exactly panned out. So there still have been mistakes in the short term, but we've seen him, I think, progress and make better decisions as time has worn on. So you can play a little bit of devil's advocate both ways. You can say, look, if you don't have confidence in him, you can say there's nothing in his history that suggests that he has thought outside of the box. So he's going to have to show fans something that he hasn't before. But B, he's also rapidly improved, and again, his decisions over the last 18 months or so, there's been a lot more good that there has been bad. So maybe he can carry forward some of that momentum, and maybe he's learned on the job, and he can sort of use that experience to his advantage. I'm ultimately not sure. I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, and we don't have to wait that long. We only have less than a month to go before all that craziness happens.
Exactly.
That's awesome. So Harm, let's wind up with what I used to call it the six pack, but then I think that was copyrighted by almost every other podcast and vlog out there. So I now call it the 5-hole because it's a hockey related thing. Just 5 rapid fire questions, some Canucks related, some not, and you can answer as wide or as narrowly as you want. You ready to go?
Sure.
All right. What's the sport that you most excel at?
I'd say soccer.
Mm-hmm.
I played academy level, was never the most skilled. Let me throw that preface out there. I was probably the Brandon Sutter, the Jay Beagle of my team. As far as I'm the defensive specialist, and I've got a very particular role, but no, I've had friends on that team who've gone on to play university soccer. 1 or 2 of them have played NCAA. Some have tried out overseas in Europe. So soccer is definitely, I think, the sport that I excel most at.
That's awesome. You're probably being too humble, but you sound like me and my roller hockey team. They just tell me to stand in front of the net and hope that a puck bounces off my big butt and past the goaltender. Okay,
sounds like me.
Number 2, if you're starting a team from scratch, Elias Pettersson or Quinn Hughes?
Elias Pettersson. I just believe that a franchise center is more valuable than a number 1 defenseman. I look at the way I'd explain it is just, if you were to break down the video of how Elias Pettersson scores his points and how Quinn Hughes scores his points, I think you'd realize, and this has nothing to do, I'm not trying to take anything away from what Hughes has accomplished. I think you'll just generally notice that centers have the ability to impact the game in a far more decisive way than defensemen. If you were to break those, again, points down, for Pettersson, you'd see that he drove a lot of those goals individually, a lot of those assists individually. Whereas if you look at a lot of Hughes's points, I'd wager that a ton of his assists, for example, and this is true for basically any defenseman, a lot of his points come from passing the puck on the power play to someone else. Like the perfect example is John Carlson on the Washington Capitals. How many assists has he gotten just teeing up Alex Ovechkin for one-timers, right? I think that dynamic...
I should have got an assist giving it to Alex Ovechkin.
Exactly. So I think that dynamic is prevalent for defensemen. And because of that, I look at Blue Liners more as talent amplifiers. They can amplify the impact of elite players on your team. But without that elite talent, without the Elias Petterssons on your team, I think it's much harder for someone like Quinn Hughes. Like if he was on Buffalo or Detroit, I think he'd have a much tougher time scoring a ton and having a wider team impact compared to a player like Pettersson.
Right. Good answer. And does your answer change, Harm, if instead of I ask which player would you take starting a team, if I said which player is more important to the Canucks' success going forward, does your answer change?
Well, they're equally important because I don't think the Canucks do well without either piece. But again, I think Pettersson is the more valuable player.
Fair enough. Number 3, easy one. And you're not going to offend me either way because I'm half of both. Do you prefer Japanese food or Chinese food?
Ooh, to tell you the truth, for one, I am the most basic picky eater ever. I usually eat Italian,
Yeah.
or I'm the type. Doesn't matter what restaurant I go to, and Drance can attest to this because I bet I drive him nuts. I'm the type of guy to order a burger and fries at every restaurant I go to if
Yeah.
it's possible. So that's an important preface. If I were to choose between Japanese and Chinese, I'd say I'd say maybe Japanese, just because of I don't mind sushi.
Yeah.
Again, it's not my favorite. I'm again a super picky eater. I'm the worst to go out for dinner with, but that would be my choice there.
Okay. Well, you must be easy on road trips then. That's fine. Okay. Number four, speak on the food theme. If they are paying for dinner, who would you rather spend an evening with at a dinner table? Travis Green, Jim Benning, or Francesco Accalini? Which of the three?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think Francesco Aquilini, just because we don't see him a lot. I think there's a lot of um, mystery to his personality. I think over the course of the season, I've gotten to know Travis Green and Jim Benning pretty well, and you just run into them at various points, maybe on road trips or wherever. You see them a lot. You interact with them versus Francesco Aquilini. I've seen him here and there, but I've never spoken to him, and
Yeah.
I just think that'd be a very interesting conversation. And if he's paying, I know he's spoiling me. So,
Well said. Well said. And lastly, Harm, what's one thing that people don't know about you
oh,
that
that's
you
a
don't
really good
mind
question.
you don't mind a few hundred people, whoever watches this, actually knowing about you?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Yeah, no, I didn't give you any prep time, so
What's one thing people don't know about me? Oh, this is a tough one. I'm trying to think of something
well,
that
I put you on the spot. So
yeah, I'm trying to think. Here's a good one. I have the worst recall memory. This is perfect.
oh, that's
I
interesting.
like on the spot thinking back,
Yeah,
in trying to like remember things. Like if you asked me what I had for dinner 2 days ago,
yeah,
my mind would draw a complete blank.
yeah.
And so I mean, I couldn't think of anything, which I guess perfectly feeds into this point. One thing people may not know is I don't have very good recall memories.
Harm, this was excellent. I know I can speak for everyone that follows this YouTube channel that we appreciate your good work with the Athletic. We appreciate a young, fresh insight and yeah, just an awareness of what's going on and how everything's are piecing together, and the fact that you're able to articulate it so well. So I really want to thank you for spending time with me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Clay.
Anytime, Harm. Good luck. We'll see you soon.